Thank you. All right, welcome this evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along. My name's Leanne, and I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging the Cubby Cubby and the Jinibara peoples of the coastal plains and hinterlands of the Sunshine Coast, and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet tonight, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here tonight. So, as I said, my name is Leanne, and on behalf of the Psychology Club at the Uni and the Sunshine Coast Branch of the Australian Psychological Society, I'd like to welcome you all, and particularly our panellists, for coming along tonight and sharing your wisdom so we can exploit it in our careers. On the panel tonight, we have, Marnie and Miriam, Simone, and Jennifer. Thank you. And I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves in just a moment. But first, just a couple of quick admin things. As you've probably realised, this is being live streamed and recorded, just so you know, and can keep that in the back of your mind when you're sharing any of your thoughts and asking any questions of the panel. Second, in the event of unexpected events, as you do, fire exits up the back and around the corner for those in the room. Great. Well, I'll now ask our panellists to introduce a little bit about themselves and how they got to where they are today. And then we'll open the floor to questions. Okay, would you like to start?
My name's Jennifer Hunter, and I guess my journey's been a little longer in some ways. I started working in occupational health and safety after doing an undergrad in behavioural science, and just over the years I kept studying and learning and growing, and then the work that I was doing gradually changed from being physically related to being more psychologically related. So I thought, I need more information, I need more skills and knowledge, and just kept studying. So I ended up doing the grad dip so I could get into an honours program, and then I thought I might be an org psych, and then at the last minute I became a clinical psych. So that's a couple of decades, and now I'm in early career, I suppose, in a clinical space, but I also still work in organisational settings as well.
Hi everyone, my name's Miriam. I had a very tunnel-visioned approach to my career, getting into undergrad, getting into honours, tick, got through that. But honours was very traumatic. You all going through a bit of trauma right now? It was for me, and it absolutely burnt my system out. And when I got to the end of honours, I just missed out on a 1A. I got a 2A. My thesis is controversial. And what ended up happening was I didn't get into the clinical program that I applied for, and I didn't have a plan B, and I got really sick. And I spent the next couple of years of my life trying to figure out what the hell was going on with my body and discovering that I'd developed an autoimmune condition. It had left me in a pretty bad place. And because I didn't have a plan B and I was feeling a bit disillusioned with psychology, I went and sought out a different pathway. And that took me into life coaching. So I studied life coaching, and I set myself up my own business at the age of 24 and put an ad in the paper and got an office, and I thought, that's it. That's all I got to do, right? No, that doesn't really work very well. So I made some efforts to upskill, learn some business. I ended up studying neuro-linguistic programming and hypnosis and some other therapies as well, and started incorporating that into my coaching practice. I got other coaching roles as well in corporate settings, and that was great to give me some diversity. Then the calling came back. And I found out that the University of Adelaide, I'm from Adelaide, recently moved up here, I found the University of Adelaide offered a health masters. And I thought, well, that sounds a little bit more like me, because over the journey of being unwell, I'd actually gone and explored a lot of complementary and alternative therapies. In my coaching work, I'd discovered lots of different fringe psychotherapies I thought were really interesting and valuable, and that gave me a much broader interest in health in general. So I did the Health Masters at University of Adelaide. And then I incorporated, when I finished that, my psychology offerings into my existing business. So I've been in solo private practice all the way through. Did some great placements that gave me insights into pain management. Health psychology is a rich field that I think I get to represent here tonight. and give you an opportunity to understand the broad ways that you can apply in clinical settings, in health promotion settings, what health psychology is. I also have a real entrepreneurial bent, so I have set up and co-founded a company called Lifespan Dynamics with my partner. My partner works in that full-time while I still run my practice, and we have a business in what's called photobiomodulation therapy, or PBM, sometimes known as red light therapy. So we distribute medical devices that are for clinicians as well as for the general public to utilise that type of technology, which is really exciting. I'm contemplating a PhD, but I haven't quite lost all my marbles around that yet. But if I do, it will be in a combination of PBM and also mind-body medicine, which I'm very interested in. So that's a long journey. It's been not the straightest pathway, but I want to let you guys know that there's all sorts of ways to get to where you want to go.
Pardon me. Thank you. Well, that's a hard act to follow. Lots of passion there. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I left school. I've got two older brothers, so I just did what they did because that's what you do, right? So they both did Bachelor of Science. So off I went to Brizzy, to UQ, to do Bachelor of Science just like them. Unfortunately, though, for me, I didn't do biology in high school and had two bio subjects in first semester. Genetics and evolution, I didn't even know what a mitochondria was, and human biology. So that was extremely difficult. Had a third subject, which was chemistry 1A, so did chem in high school, so that was a dream. That was easy. And then my fourth subject was Psych 101. So of that little mixture, psychology was the only thing that sparked my interest. So I quickly got out of a Bachelor of Science, moved into a Bachelor of Arts and had fun. So still didn't really know what I wanted to do. Did some philosophy, some drama, continued with the psych, moved into second year, and very much enjoyed the psychology. So ended up graduating with a double major in psychology, and then I actually moved to Brazil and lived in Brazil for a year, as you do. So came back and then started my honours, and probably didn't take it seriously enough because I just spent the year partying in Brazil. Too many caipirinhas and party beach time. And I'd probably have to agree, thinking back to my degrees, honours was actually really tough. And I think for me, the pivotal factor was the thesis as well. So the coursework was interesting, but the thesis was really difficult. I did my honours thesis in organisational psychology. My supervisor was the head of the school at the time. He was amazing and wonderful. At the end of that year, I wanted to be a sports psych, neuropsych, clin psych, and all of them, whatever else you could have. I wanted to be the whole lot. And I'm like, I don't know what to do here. And he gave me some very sage advice. And he said, if you're thinking about in any way being a clinical psychologist, it'll be a lot easier for you to start with that than to go down the org psych route and then to come back to clin psych. So even though I very much enjoyed honours and I very much enjoyed the org psych side of things, I went, okay, all right, well, let's do this. So then comes postgrad. So again, I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I applied for the PhD, the doctorate, the masters, because that's what you do. And I got second-class honours because I probably partied a bit too hard during honours as well, because I was a bit distracted. That's okay, a PISA degree, but there is a lot of pressure that sits there as well for you. And so I'm sitting in first week of masters because I was told I couldn't do a PhD because I didn't get first class. I'm like, okay, all right, well, let's go with the masters option. So I'm sitting there in week one and going, I really want that doctor title, you know? I can see my name there one day. Dr. Simone, sure, I can see that. I want that. That was my vision by that stage. And so, okay, I've got to move out of the masters and move into something. PhD still wasn't an option at that stage. And in one of my ethics lectures, the lecturer saying, I'm looking for a student. If anyone's looking for a project and wants to do a doctorate, come and see me. I'm like, righto, let's roll with this. So so opportunistic, and I just went with that. In hindsight, it was difficult. I wasn't passionate about the topic, but I got through with, as you know, when you come that far, the perseverance and commitment to that end goal. So I did a dual doctorate in clinical psychology and clinical neuropsychology from UQ, and am very grateful for that experience. So I love having the dual qualifications as a clin psych. I can bring that to my neuropsych, and when I'm in my neuropsych space, I'm always thinking about the clinical side of things. So hands down for me, I am so pleased that was the journey that I went on. I never want to study ever again for the rest of my life. I studied for 20 years straight. I had my 1 year of fun in Brazil, but I was done by the end of that. So, but that was a long time ago. I finished, was it 2008? It just feels like a lifetime ago now. So, so that was my journey in terms of getting to where I am. I've worked in private practice since I finished university. So, and I've got my own private practice. I moved up here to the coast 4.5 years ago, and love it. So if anyone has any questions about clin psych, neuropsych, and working in private practice, I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Hello, I'm Marnie. So I did my Bachelor and Honours at UQ, and then went off and went overseas and kind of just forgot about psychology for a while, then came back and worked at in adult mental health down in Grafton, which was amazing but full on. And so I did the 4+2 route through the supervised practice in adult mental health. And then I moved to Melbourne and did my neuropsychology masters, which turned into a doctorate somewhere along the way. Because everyone's like, well, you're already halfway, anyway, some peer pressure maybe. Which was great. And then when I graduated down there, I had 2 jobs. One was at Origin Youth Health, which is a youth mental health service for 15 to 25. I was their first neuropsych who wasn't working in research, who was working clinically. So that was brilliant. And then my other job was with Take Two, which is part of Berry Street. It's like a specialised therapeutic service for kids with significant maltreatment histories. So it's very, case managers only have 3 or 4 clients because those clients have such intensive needs. And then so I was the neuropsych for that service. So I kind of straight off the bat ended up in the kind of children and adolescent space, and then realised that, and sort of mental health as well, because that was my background as well. So neuropsychology and psychiatry was sort of, what I really loved. And then those sorts of, working in those sorts of areas with kids and teenagers became something that I just really, really enjoyed. And then I moved from Melbourne to Noosa. I thought I'd get a neuropsych job up here and realised there weren't any, and so I had to make my own job. So started a private practice and have had my private practice in Noosa for about 11 years now. So I just see kids and teenagers there.
Thank you all for sharing some really interesting reflections there. For me, as a student myself and a member of the APS on the Sunshine Coast, it's a lot of study still ahead of us yet, but also good to know that it does end up doing some really interesting work, including on the coast, which who would want to live elsewhere. So before we go any further, I'd be really keen to open the floor up to questions. This is your panel, so I welcome questions. You can stick your hand up, you can yell out. Thank you. Great.
Question for Miriam, actually. Coming from like that life coachy space to then moving into the evidence-based practices, how have you balanced that sort of using alternative therapies perhaps previously, or things that weren't so evidence-based, but then falling under the APRO banner and having to use evidence-based practices?
Thanks for asking that question. I love talking about it. I had had the privilege for a few years of lecturing to honours students about complementary alternative medicines and fringe psychotherapies, and it was really great to talk about this. I think, first of all, I really honour the experiences that I had before I became a psychologist, and I built up my own anecdotal evidence of what really helps people. So first and foremost, those things can do amazing things for people. Coming into doing my placements and having to really surrender into working with the therapies and tools that are in the approved list, initially I had some reservations and resistance to it, but I understood that I was there to learn and to fully grasp those therapeutic models. And they have a lot of wonderful things that they offer too. So in my practice, I make sure that I am evidence-informed and evidence-based in my work. I also do coaching as well, still, so I still have opportunities to use those skills in other areas. And I do also do a lot of training and facilitation, so I find that that skill base helps me in that space as well. Is it comfortable? No. It's not comfortable having a broader perspective and then feeling like you've got to get into a box. But there's a reason that that box exists, and I feel comfortable and I understand where those boundaries lie and how to work with those. And there's all sorts of ways in which I can weave the right kind of knowledge from my other experiences into that space too. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
It's like the growth of evidence-based practice, like how can we, there's such a box at the moment, but if you were to open your mind and look outside of that, there's so many emerging therapies, but how are we as psychology to take them on board?
Yeah.
Does that limit our practice, especially with the influx of like life coaches and Instagram coaches and whatnot? Sure, that may be great, it may serve people, but also the governing body of APA and psychology and the ethics behind it is also amazing. But like,
Yeah.
I feel like we may be losing people because we're so governed by this little box that we can't necessarily reach the people we do want to reach.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we navigate that, like murky waters?
It is murky waters, and you'll see differing opinions between who you talk to. I think it's really valuable to recognise as psychologists, or in whatever space you guys work in, that we have competition and there are other people offering other options to people, and people have a right to choose and to explore things to find the right recipe for them. And if you have a broader perspective, you might be able to have a couple of extra recipe ingredients that you can add into the mix that might really help somebody. But we've got to look at the big picture, hey?
Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Next question. While you guys are thinking of one, I might ask one. Marnie, you've got up on there a strengths-based approach, and that was mentioned in a lot of our classes in undergrad for what is very obvious reasons in some respects. But I'm really interested to hear about why it's number 3, I guess, in the dot points with your approach.
So core business for me is assessment and diagnosis of neurodevelopmental disorders. That's really, really common diagnostic question. Does this young person have or child have autism or ADHD or a learning difficulty? And I think, we all know the DSM-5 criteria on that. We know, the best evidence-based tools to use and that kind of thing. What I see is often lost is that an assessment is used to, in a deficit-based model, like this is what is wrong with you, you have got ADHD, you cannot pay attention. And I think it's just imperative, not just nice, it's imperative that kids hear the other side of the narrative, which is, yeah, sure, your attention goes up and down, but when you are focusing on something you love, you are unstoppable. You've got that passion, you've got that hyper-focus. And by the time, I often see kids in about grade 3 or 4 who have kind of fallen under the radar diagnostically, and by the time they get there, kids are still pretty black and white. They're like, well, I can't read as well as this person, therefore I'm dumb. And so it's kind of, I feel like it's my job to go, we get it. You can't read very well, that's okay. Loads of other kids can't either. We've got this plan. We're going to do these things to help you. But also, don't forget that you've got an amazing, visual memory. Or then we go wider. I'm like, you are a super cool dancer. And we sort of really try and I see that feedback session, which is often just with parents because the kids might be too small. But if the child doesn't come, I still write them a little feedback letter. I say, dear blah, blah, thanks for coming in. These are the things that you're really good at. Yes, we know it's tough with writing. We're going to do this to help. But I think that one session, and I don't see loads of these kids again. It's just assessment and diagnosis. It's not therapy. That one session is this chance to help them shift their own narrative about that deficit, that we all tend to focus on, is just to go, yes, but don't forget those strengths. Yeah.
Is that not common practice?
Well, do you know what? I feel like it is common practice. Well, no, that's not quite right. I think it is what most people aspire to do and what we should be doing, but practically speaking, sometimes kids just get put through a whisk and a wire and diagnosed with dyslexia, and off they go with a report that may get filed in a filing cabinet somewhere and never looked at again. And so I think it's really important that what we say about that child, not just to the parents in the feedback, but also in that report, makes it clear that this is a human. So I never say, this child has a language deficit. I might say, look, they find it difficult to talk in social settings or something. And I really try and, when you read that report, I like to think you get a little glimpse of who that person is, together with their strengths and challenges like we all have.
Thank you. We got another question?
Just for the neuropsychologists on the panel, could you maybe walk us through what a typical day looks like?
So I do clin and neuro, but if we're just talking about neuropsychology, so I predominantly specialise in medico-legal, so I get referrals through from insurers and lawyers directly. So usually it's in the compensation space. So somebody typically has had, let's say, a car accident and has sustained a traumatic brain injury, and they've also sustained multiple other injuries, and so they've seen an orthopaedic surgeon for the physical injuries, a psychiatrist for the PTSD or psychological injury, and the neuropsychological assessment is another piece of the puzzle in terms of their cognitive deficits that they've sustained. I'm in private practice, so I choose my hours. So I rock in at 9 o'clock and I start with the client and do a clinical interview, which takes about 60 minutes or so, doing a comprehensive history. You'll get a pro at doing that. It might take you a bit longer to start with. Take a break and then move into a comprehensive neuropsychological assessment. So I only see adults. So Marnie and I were having a joke earlier about kids are for her, and I'll keep the adults. And so assessments can take 4 to 5 hours in duration. So we look at all cognitive domains: planning, problem solving, attention, concentration, visual memory, verbal memory, and that's divided down even further. And have rest breaks for the client. For some clients who can't sustain that amount of testing, then we break the assessments up because some people just can't cope with that. If we feel that the client is fatiguing or significant pain or significant mood that's impacting on the assessment, then ethically we'll terminate the assessment and reschedule for another day as well. Through that process then, once we've finished the assessment, the client will then go home. We'll spend some time analysing the results, writing the report, which takes a lot of time, but you can do it from home, luxury of your own home in your jammies if you want to, so you don't necessarily have to be in the office to do that. We've also got scoring software that can help with scoring, so I'm a bit old school and still do some hand scoring. And then I prepare a comprehensive report that's usually 20 pages in duration, and send that directly through to the insurer or through to the lawyer. So that's the medico-legal side of things. I've got a team of 3 neuropsychologists, and so we also do assessments with people through the NDIS, so National Disability Insurance Scheme. So that's more in terms of a diagnosis, and then mostly around treatment and support supporting that person at home with independence or those types of things. We also service referrals from Work Cover Queensland, so they're an insurer, so that's usually a work-related accident. And we also do private referrals as well, so adults who are then paying for the assessment. Unfortunately, neuropsychology isn't covered by Medicare, so Medicare, if you're listening. And so in terms of accessing neuropsychology privately, it's not affordable for a lot of people, and then that precludes them from getting the service that they require. If the person's had an accident, they've generally, a serious accident, they would have gone to hospital, and they'll often have a screening assessment done from a neuropsychologist within the hospital setting, and then they will typically be followed up in a community with allied health, so they'll have probably physio, speech, psychology and neuro for a period of time, but then they will be discharged. Unless they're then linked into another service like NDIS or APS, Acquired Brain Injury Outreach Service, or some other organisation, STEPS, community care, whatever it might be, then often they're lost. And that's there's a real gap there in terms of accessing it privately. And then in the sake of children, to be able to afford an assessment out of pocket, it's expensive, and so there's a gap for people who can't get that. Anything?
Thank you. So we're both in private practice, so that's sort of a really good description of what we do. But I think it's really important to know that neuropsychologists work in a vast array of settings, which is really, the potential career-wise is really interesting. So we're in private practice. You find neuropsychologists in acute medical settings, people who've just had strokes or acquired brain injuries. You find them in rehabilitation settings for that longer-term rehab after a stroke or a brain injury. You find them in addiction services, so the drug and alcohol addiction services, psychiatric services. You find them working with geriatricians, diagnosing dementia and Alzheimer's in memory clinics. Then you also find them in the other end of the life spectrum, which is, those early developmental services, catching diagnoses of various, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders or genetic differences that affect the brain. So it's really of course, research, academia, it's really interesting field. It's quite remarkable. You can go in all different directions with it, which is really great.
So there's not only the assessment side, but treatment. So adjustment to injury counselling, cognitive rehabilitation. So not everybody needs an assessment. They might just need some support and treatment. And how do I cope with my memory issues, and how do I function at home or at work? And often our reports can be used to assist somebody to return to work and to have reasonable adjustments and accommodations in that space. Or our reports can be used to help with study, to return to school or get special considerations if the person has ADHD or something like that, extra time for exams or movement breaks and things like that. So, yeah, that's probably anything else you can think of? Okay.
Thank you both. Great. So we've got some questions coming from students watching on Zoom. I'm just going to repeat them word for word. Simone and Marnie, you both mentioned you partied and enjoyed life while studying and getting your postgraduate degree. It seems like you still managed to reach the pinnacle of psych, in my opinion, neuropsychology, while not necessarily following the usual path. This is extremely impressive given how hard it is to achieve this. Could you elaborate on your experience on getting a postgrad position in neuropsychology and maybe share some advice for someone who wants to follow a similar path and can relate to both of your stories, aka the partying and neuropsych, I think?
Brilliant question.
Well, I'm just thinking, go to practice what you preach. So you have to see what cognitive deficit looks like so that you can resonate with that when you're with your client. Street cred, that's what it's all about, isn't it? So I think somewhere along your training, you reach that moment of, this is what I want to do. And so, whether that goal, you have that from the outset or it comes later or you meander and find your way. So work-life balance, and we're human beings, and so I've always worked hard and played hard. That's just how I roll, and life's too short not to have fun. So I think you can be diligent, conscientious, and work hard and study hard, and then have your work-life balance. So go surfing every day if that's what you want to do. Travel if that's important to you, and personally, I wouldn't put my life on hold to do the study and not enjoy life along the way. So I think it's just about grabbing life, and warts and all. Yes, there'll be stressful times, but you also get great holidays at uni too. So let's be real with that as well. So and what just reflecting back on through uni, what was really wonderful was the cohort that I went through. So, and I've stayed friends with lots of the people that I went to university with, and we helped each other. So it wasn't competitive. It was, we're in this together, let's support each other. So we had study groups, and it was, you do that chapter, I'll do this one, and then we come together, or however that rolled. And we supported, and we wanted, and we're rooting for everyone. We wanted everyone to succeed in that space. We know that honours is very competitive, and then getting into postgraduate. But whatever path you decide to do, I'm a believer in that's where you're meant to go, and you'll find your way and have fun along the way.
So that's an interesting question. For me, my undergrad at UQ, my marks were incredibly average. And I kind of didn't care. I was really young when I did undergrad. I just did it. It was like the Bachelor of Arts. So you did like 3 psychology subjects and then padded it out with all the really fun stuff, like anthropology and stuff. But so then when I went to do my 2 years in mental health, I really, really enjoyed learning on the job in that setting with a really experienced supervisor. And I had, just before I started that job, I had read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks, who's just the most wonderful neurologist who writes beautifully, writes amazing stories about his patients. And I was just like, oh my good Lord, this is what I want to do. And so when I got the job in mental health, I said to my supervisor, I'm only here for 2 years because I want to do neuropsychology eventually. And he was lovely, and he gave me every adult client that had a neurological bent to their symptom profile was allocated to me. So I had some really interesting clients who had psychiatric and neurological diagnoses. And then I applied to the master's program in Melbourne, and they didn't even give me a call. They just said, no, you don't have the GPA. And I basically just badgered them and said, but I really, really want to do this. And that GPA was from when I was 19 or 20, and doesn't reflect where I want to go now, and just give me an interview. And I really did just keep emailing and calling until they gave me an interview. And then, I was so passionate about it by then, it was clear in the interview that I probably would be a good candidate because I had really pushed them hard. And so that's how I got in. It wasn't neat and easy. I really pushed. And then once I was in the program, it didn't feel like hard work anymore. So honours did feel like hard work, I totally agree. But once I got into that neuropsych masters, I was in every class. I never missed anything. I was like, I just wanted to learn more about brains. I just loved it. And so then it felt easy. And so I guess that's when you know you're on the right path.
We've got more questions. Yeah.
One for Jennifer. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about group work and what draws you to that and how much of your schedule that takes up, and just what that looks like.
Well, as I sort of mentioned earlier, my background was in workplace health and safety. So I really was, in settings looking at manual handling and, dealing with factory line, doing noise monitoring, getting into the bottom of the plane and doing all that sort of stuff. But then I ended up taking jobs where I was working more like in the financial industry, and we'd be getting armed hold-ups and would be having armed hold-ups, and I'd be turning up, responding to staff following an armed hold-up, or I would be, dealing with people who were working on the trading floor in banking and feeling stressed out. And I just suddenly felt like I don't have the knowledge I need to be good at this work. So I kept studying and looking for more ways to be good at the work that I was doing, because there was this shift, I suppose, in the hazards that people face at work. So now that, and I guess COVID has intensified that, we are seeing more and more people who are doing really long hours of work, really intense ways of working, and feeling very fatigued and burnt out. So that's how I came into psychology, more that I needed to be good at responding to what the hazards were that people were dealing with. So through all of that study, I ended up, working as well as studying, and I had this unique opportunity when I was doing my master's here at USC to take a work project that I was doing and make it my thesis for my master's study. So I actually looked at the challenge of suicide in construction workers, and I took a clinical program that was actually developed by UQ and modified it into a workplace intervention targeting mental health and wellbeing for construction workers. So that was a really unique opportunity, and we had about 7 different construction companies come on board, and we ran a group intervention. So using the clinical skills and using, evidence-informed practices that you'd use in a clinical setting, but taking that and making it a brief intervention for men who don't have time to come off a construction site and attend therapy sessions. So we did that, and we're in the process of writing it up now to publish it. But that's part of the passion about the group work, and I suppose the reason why I ended up going into the clinical space is tapping onto something that Simone said earlier. I think if you go into an organisational role, people assume when you're a psychologist that you know everything. And it's such a broad field, isn't it? Like, you just can't know everything. I wouldn't even begin to know anything about the space that you work in. But it's really interesting, But you've got to kind of know what your zone is and where you want to work. And I found that over time, in a workplace setting, I was just being asked to know more and be more than what I felt my postgrad in HR and my undergrad in psych was giving me. And I thought, I feel I need to go more in this space. And then I got sucked into the vortex of clinical psychology. So, and for me, I'm very conscious of, I've got a couple of decades in organisational space, and I'm a brand new minted clean psych, having left USC 2 years ago. So I'm really aware of, like, what do I do to keep all those parts of who I am going? So at the moment, I'm subcontracting with an EAP company, and I do some of that group intervention. Today I was working with a group of people on dealing with difficult conversations for a really stressful piece of work that they're doing. And it was great. I was able to bring in my clinical skills, talking about strategies for managing emotional regulation, which I just wouldn't have had the depth of knowledge to bring to that session if I came in as a HR practitioner. So it does make it, works a lot easier. It's easy, isn't it, when you're in the right space and you're enjoying what you're doing and you're really well trained and you bring that skill and knowledge in.
Thank you. That's a really interesting insight. My background's in the Australian Public Service, and I can see that transition from managing physical hazards to managing different hazards. Yes, and how that may even move forward into, hopefully, prevention as well. But we'll see. Do we have more questions?
This question's from Sophie from Zoom, and she would just love to know if you had one piece of advice to give to an honours student applying for clinical masters this year, what would you give?
Go down the panel if you like.
I also only got to a devastating, didn't go straight through to anything. And I put my heart and soul into it. I didn't even party. So, you will get setbacks. And part of being a psychologist is understanding that that hurts and it's a setback. But you've got to really think about, what is it that you're trying to do? Who is it that you want to be? And is there another way to get there? and that's what I think all of us have talked about today. So there is no straight line, there is no guaranteed pathway. And that's a little bit like what we do with our clients every day, isn't it? Okay, so you don't have the skills or the strengths in a particular area that you need to get there. Let's build that up another way. Let's help you get there. Let's let you live the life that you want to live. And in the meantime, you know, as Simone pointed out, do some partying, have a break, come back a couple of years later and just keep trying.
That's great advice. I'll build and expand. For any master's program you might like to get into, of which there are many different types, yeah? Not just clinical. Really, to expand on that, getting additional experience in something that's relevant and knowing how that correlates and corresponds so that you can advocate for yourself if you get an interview. Talk to people beforehand and find out what do the interviewers want. So leading up to getting into the Masters of Health Psychology at Adelaide Uni, which take 5 students a year, I went and I met with the coordinator of the course 6 months beforehand and asked her, what do you look for? What do you want? I built rapport. I put in her mind me. So she remembered me, and I already had a starting point to build on from. And I think also in addition to that, talking to other students who've been successful into getting entry, how did they sell themselves? You have to advocate for yourself, and you have to say, I see myself having a long career in this area I'm really passionate in. So you've got to bring the best of you into that situation if you get an interview.
I'd also just say you've got to be in it to win it. So why not apply for the PhD, the doctorate and everything in all unis around Australia? See what comes back, and if you've got to move to Adelaide, move to Adelaide.
Yeah, that's good advice. I moved to Melbourne, but I think going on from the fact that they didn't want to give me an interview, in the interview they did say, what do you know about ADHD? And it actually hadn't occurred to me that ADHD would be part of the neuropsychology remit. I was thinking neurology and psychiatry, and so I just was honest and I said I don't actually know anything about ADHD yet, but I cannot wait to learn. And so I think that's okay if you get stumped in an interview to just go, yeah, you're right, actually I don't know yet, but this is why I'm here. I want to learn more about it, and I want to sort of, I think the more you can convince the interviewers that this is your path and you're determined to follow it, I think the better it looks. I mean, because really the master's program is long and hard, and you want people who are really committed to see it through. So I think that's where you have an opportunity to show that in the interview.
Do we have any more on Zoom? Do we have any more in the room? Yes, great.
I just had a question about private practice, and I was wondering if there is anything special that you need to do when setting up a private practice, whether for neuropsych or clinical psych, you know, as compared with just a regular, I don't know, jewellery making business, I guess.
Who would like to answer that one?
One of my last placements for my doctorate was in private practice. I'd done all of my training in Govey, and because I had that dream, I decided, yes, let's go for this, because I eventually want to have my own private practice one day. So that was the best grounding, and as a student, whilst learning, to learn the ropes of what it would be like in a private practice, rather than finishing and then, ta-da, off you go, good luck, see you later. So as with any business, it takes time. It takes time to establish a business, and relationships, networking, they're all very important things. But I think having an opportunity to do a placement at a private practice whilst being a student, I think is good grounding.
Yeah, I think there's a fair bit that does go into that initial setup, and you have to be prepared for the fact that honestly, initially people are sceptical if they haven't heard of you. They won't refer to you for a while. So I think it's actually quite a nice balance to have a public health position if you can part-time, and then just to start building a private practice maybe 1 day a week, maybe up it to 2, just a slow build, because you'll be learning so much in your public position that you can bring to the private practice as well, and then you're also not putting all your eggs in private practice basket whilst you wait for that referral base to grow. Because honestly, I felt like it took a couple of years. When Mum said to me, the GP said, I wouldn't go and see her, I've never heard of Marnie. And I was like, really? She said, I went back and said to him, actually, she's really good and you shouldn't say that to anybody else. But with kids, the mum's grapevine is strong. So like the talk at school gates of someone saying, I think my little one's got ADHD, and then one mum will say, well, you should go and see this person. So cultivate your mum's network as well.
Thank you both. We've probably got time for 2 more.
So this is from Zoom as well. It's from Riley, and he wants to know, what are some extracurricular activities each of the panelists engaged in and found helpful in their preparation for getting into masters and PhD programs?
Thanks. We might start with you again, Jennifer.
I think my extracurricular were my vocational activities. I think, a couple of, or not a couple, but shy of a couple of decades of work experience in a highly related field just demonstrates the commitment to working in that space. And I think each of us have kind of conveyed that when we went for our master's interview, we had a clear idea of what we wanted to achieve, and we could show not just study, not just a thesis, but real life commitment to working in that space. And I think if you do take a detour, it helps. Especially if you can find where there's so many different roles where psychology is relevant and works. So, I think you'll have no trouble finding somewhere to sharpen your vocational skills, which I think really counts in getting into masters.
So for me, definitely having experience with clients in a coaching capacity, there's a lot of similarity, so it was very easy to be able to draw from that. In addition, because I was very active at the time with the International Coaching Federation, ICF, I just volunteered a lot of my time to be involved in a community and learn from other professionals and offer my time in a voluntary role in leadership, which also gave me some great skills as well in that space, which I still use, and I do a lot of work in leadership development now. Also, when I was doing my undergraduate, I worked as an orderly at the biggest hospital in Adelaide. Now, what that did was that gave me a hugely deep insight into what it is to be in a hospital, to go through every level of that, from presenting through ED, pulling people out of helicopters, and taking people to the mortuary, and everything in between. Really gave me a deeper insight into health and how the health system works and what people go through in the journey as well in hospital. So I draw on that a lot. What an orderly is? Yeah, so basically an orderly is like the internal transportation system of a hospital. So getting patients from A to B, getting equipment and other stuff around the place, and just supporting medical staff. It's a very physical job, but I loved it. Yeah.
I was just reflecting on that question that got asked by Riley, and what I find fascinating about psychology as opposed to or as compared to, say, nursing or teaching degrees, is that you have to wait until you're in postgrad to see a real client. And that seems like an extraordinary amount of time. So I remember, starting, whatever it was, month 1 of the doctorate, going, oh my God, what? I don't know what I'm doing. I've got 4 years of study, but I don't know what I'm doing. So I hope that does change down the track. So I think I didn't do this, but I think what could be helpful is to, volunteer at homeless shelters, or to work for Lifeline, or to be a support coordinator, or have some type of life experience that allows you to have interactions with members of the public who have psychopathology, who have needs, who present in different ways and have challenges, and that you can relate to them. So even if you're just serving soup, even if you're just, greeting somebody, but to have exposure to that, I think would be super helpful to then find what your niche might be in terms of, I really enjoy working with those populations or that type of person.
Yeah, that's very good advice. When I was doing my honours year, and after that as well, I worked at Kids Helpline for a couple of years, and I think that my piece of advice to add to that is the volunteering and working in other sort of roles where you do interact with people, because those, I mean, it seems almost too easy. The counselling skills, your basic counselling skills of how to really hear someone, I think sometimes we, like you say, we forget about them. You know, we do all this study, and then don't see someone until the clinic. And everybody's freaking out because, you know, they've forgotten how to talk to a person. But I think that those basic counselling skills and volunteering and doing those sorts of community-minded positions is really important.
Do you have any idea why the university programs are so research-based for the first 4 years? Like, you're all practicing and you all seem to be like, it doesn't make sense.
I had a moment where I think I might have figured a little bit of that out. I don't know. I was just doing the USC Clinical Masters a couple of years ago, and, you know, the amount of learning and the volume that you need to plough through as part of the Clinical Masters program is huge. And it's not hard, there's just a lot of it. And I remember thinking, God, I'm really glad that I was such a nerd in my undergrad and I read all that, because one chapter, I can't remember what it was, but one chapter I was reading, I was thinking, there's so many sub-theories that sit underneath this that you need to have to be able to do the next part, that if you just went straight there, you'd be like, I don't understand what this is about. And I just had that, you know, I guess it's all stacked up for a reason. And I think, you know, I'm really glad that I've done all those hard yards now, because I can handle this as part of that clinical master's training. So it's still just so much hard work, but, you know, that was something that a moment I had, so happy to share it.
Psychologists are scientists practitioners. Science first. That's what sets us apart from a lot of other mental health professionals or other people that work in a similar space. And I think we while it's a grind and annoying and boring a lot of time, right, you've got to have that foundation to work at the high level that we're expected to work with the communities that we work with.
Thank you. Both great answers.
Because the science says that building a rapport with a client is sometimes better than the therapy you use, but yet we're not learning to build rapport between 5th or 6th year. Why is it not such a prominent thing that we focus on early on? It's all like real sciencey based, but is that part of actually being a practitioner? So
It would be good to have some practicals.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think it's changed over the years too. I remember doing my behavioural science degree a long time ago, because I had lots of breaks, and we did a placement and we went to a school and worked with children, and that was in my 3rd year. So I think it's maybe ebbed and flowed.
Different universities are restructuring themselves to include counselling skills much earlier on, and that's how it should be. You know, you should have a bachelor degree with some skills, right?
And my cynical viewpoint is they're all academics, so they don't know what the real world is like.
Sorry, we'll just delete that bit.
Probably got time for one last question.
So we've kind of covered this, but I just thought I'd bring it to a summary with your take-home piece of advice. So obviously this is an honours panel, and some people will be applying for their positions and may not be accepted. And we've talked about, you know, having, like, keep trying and do other things. But I was just wondering if you had some advice just for the person that, you know, applies for their program and doesn't gain acceptance.
Also a good question. We'll start from this end.
I think probably just reflecting on what we said earlier, that it's okay not to get in the first time. I think it's fine. In fact, I look back and think if I had gone straight from from honours to masters at, you know, the ripe old age of 21 or 2 or something, whatever it was back then, I didn't know anything about life. So I actually went and worked as a provisional psychologist as a guidance officer in Tassie. And why Tassie? Because they were really finding it hard to get psychologists. So they were really happy to employ someone who'd just done their honours and had kids helpline experience. So I worked in Tassie for a year as a school psych, and that was actually brilliant. And then I didn't end up applying for masters for like another 6 or 7 years. Like I got caught up in other psychology. So I think maybe don't see a rejection as the end of the road, but maybe just a curve that might actually take you where you're meant to go, and don't give up.
And I think having an honours degree in psychology is going to put you in good stead with whatever job you decide to do. So whether it doesn't matter, you've got people skills now and you've got an understanding of that. So whether you come back or take a detour or whatever it might be, you're in good stead and you've got that. No one can take that away from you. You've got 4 years in psychology and that's going to look great on your resume and you've got those skills. So you're going to use it wherever you end up being.
So here's my spin. My experience going through a master's program, and in no offence or disrespect to those who went straight through, right, bang, 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 high school, did the whole thing full time straight through. When they got to placement, they crumbled, man. They struggled. So it's those who came back later, like mature age students or people who didn't have a really straightforward path like most of us here, that became more interesting, more well-rounded, more experienced, and were able to handle that stuff so much better. So that no will make you a better person in the long run. It'll make you more interesting, a better clinician, more relatable, the whole lot. When things go easy, it's not actually the best thing sometimes.
Funnily enough, just to add on to that, because it's almost impossible to add on to all that goodness, but I just had friends who went, stuffed that, didn't get the grades I needed. I'm going to do social work. I'm going to go do a Masters of OT with practicing mental health accreditation, and they are so happy because they are working with populations and doing meaningful work, and all the training that they'd put in already helped them, and so they just moved on. So there's other ways. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for sharing that. You've all been fabulously open and genuine with us tonight, and it's quite refreshing, particularly for the older mature age students in the room, to hear that, experience does matter and that detours can actually be building blocks to what you're passionate about. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much for your time tonight. I think Rebecca has something little for each of you. So while she brings that up for each of you, if we could give the panel a round of applause, please. And speak of the devil, a thank you to Liam for helping out with the online recording tonight. And to Rebecca as President of the Psychology Club for organising the night, along with Pia. And yes, please applaud them as well. Pia and I are from the Sunshine Coast Branch of the Australian Psychological Society, and we just wanted to give a quick plug that we welcome student members. Details are on the website. We had a speed dating session a couple of weeks ago, which a few of you were at. It was a lot of fun. It's professional, I promise, but it's interesting how many psychologists it takes to figure out which way you rotate around the room when your 5 minutes is up, but that's another story. So thank you again. If you'd like to chat to Pia or I about participating in the APS, come and see us afterwards. Or if you want to chat about the club, see Rebecca and Liam. Have a good night. Thank you for coming along.